Hello all and welcome back to my channel. It is springtime here in good old Las Vegas, the middle of the desert, and I have some pretty exciting things going on in the grow space. So I wanted to share that I know normally spring is a grow season and we typically get our foliage ready to start growing into the summertime so that the plants can put the energy into blooms. But right now, I do have a couple of my orchids in blooms, my orchids in bloom, and I wanted to make a quick video on some tips and tricks specifically about blooming your orchids. Although much of the advice I'm going to share is probably a good general rule of thumb for getting any plant to bloom, but let's go ahead and jump right into it. So there are three factors that I feel through my experience that I know will influence the blooming of your orchid. Those three factors are going to be your temperature slash season, your watering and fertilizing, and lastly, the most important in my eyes is going to be light. So first off, with regard to temperature and season, most orchids, especially your phals that you'll find in the grocery store, are influenced to bloom by temperature drops. So these orchids will primarily bloom in your transitional seasons of fall to winter, and sometimes winter to spring, such as in my case. And in my case, light was a big factor as well, but I'll get into that when we talk about light. So temperature and season are pretty ideal because most of your orchids, again, especially your grocery store phals that you can find very commonly, are going to put out their spikes during the fall slash winter season when temperatures are dropping. Here in Las Vegas, our spring and fall isn't so pronounced. So we have our drops pretty fast, and then winter is very short, but our summer is very long. So my plants have had a very, very good time to get their strength together over the summertime. So basically, others are just going to have these ideal conditions. So all around, again, good temperature, water, and light are going to be your key things. But knowing the season that your orchid blooms is even better. So the next factor is going to be watering. So I do water when my plants are dry. And by that, I use a double cut method. So because the top of my pots dry very fast in my non-existent humidity environment, I do double my cups up. So the first cup does have holes, the second cup doesn't have any. That way I can keep a tiny reservoir of water at the bottom. When that reservoir is dry, I water. And that's a method that I've only used here when I moved to Las Vegas. Before, when I was in DC, I did water when dry, but I had pretty good humidity, so I could let them completely dry out. Here, I do monitor my plants, and some of my collection requires water twice a week. Most of my collection requires water once a week, except for the summertime. Almost everyone needs water twice a week in the summertime, but during the summer, I also increase the reservoir at the bottom until I get it right and only have to water one time a week. But it's still a lot of water. So where was I? Again, I do water when my collection is dry, so from top to bottom. So you really have to know your environment because, again, if you do have humidity, you can basically let the pot dry because the plants, the leaves themselves, will draw moisture out of the air. It's what orchids are known to do. The next thing I did pair with watering is fertilizer. I know some people don't really believe in fertilizer. Some people do it like witchcraft and want to mix things around. My advice is a slow release fertilizer such as Osmocote. I'll go ahead and flash it in the screen here. This is the fertilizer that I use for my entire collection. Orchids, house plants, a couple of trees that I have. Orchids are considered ornamentals, and this works just fine. I know there's an ingredient, I think ammonical nitrate, but because I use bark in my medium, it does help it break it down into the type of nitrogen that the plants need. And I just don't worry about these things because they work in my experience. So I kind of just don't try to fix what's not broken. And that would be my best advice toward fertilizing. Get something you can throw in the pot. They don't release until the plant needs it, which is at a certain high temperature. And the plants don't need to eat or don't need to be fertilized until the temperatures are high enough for them to need to feed. So during the winter time, when your watering is slowed back, the fertilizing is completely slowed back. Lastly, let's go ahead and get on light. Light basically goes hand in hand with temperature because it's something that externally changes unless you have grow lights, and goes with the temperature. So with your summertime, you have more sunlight, and with your winter, you have less sunlight. I do grow under grow lights, so I do control my environment, which is why I say that light is the most important factor when it comes to blooming. I do use my grow lights to just supplement. So my plants do experience the sunrise, and then sometime during the day, my plants come on, excuse me, my lights come on, and they stay on to give the plants a certain amount of hours. I do during the winter time have them at 12 hours. So when they're, when the sun goes down at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the heat of the winter, these babies are already on at 1 and they stay on to give my collection a full 12 hours. So they're on after sunset. As opposed to the summertime, I do use them in the summertime because although the sun sets later, it still sets under 16 hours here where I live in this hemisphere, I guess you can say. So during the summertime, in order to give my plants the 16 hours that orchids love, given where they're from, the grow lights do come on later in the afternoon because the sun goes down later. But again, they will stay on to give them a full duration of 16 hours of light. And I do believe, I really do believe that the light is the biggest factor when it comes to the blooming of an orchid. Although, to wrap up, providing all three factors will just increase your chances of blooming, maybe even outside of a certain season. Right now, I have a couple of orchids that are blooming outside of their season, such as I believe my Path Psych that I'm going to show you guys, and these phals. Most of them start to bloom back in the fall time. These got their spikes somewhere around Christmas, and they're here. So to jump into, I did want to talk about a couple of my plants that are completely in bloom. So give me 1 second. I'm just going to take this off, not in bloom, in spike and in bloom, but I'm going to take the camera off the tripod and just walk around 1 second. This is my Phal Sogo Lawrence to start that I was mentioning earlier. I purchased him back in September of 2021, so he's been in my collection for almost 3 years, pretty long, and he's quite a big orchid. I'll put my hand up there for a size. Yeah, pretty cool. So this is his second blooming since I purchased him. Pretty fragrant orchid and very, very colorful, colorful with sunset colors, yellow and pink with tinges of white. In the parentage, not to get too into it, we do have summer and winter, spring and winter bloomers. So this, I can definitely say, does everything in the spring, roots, leaves, and this year he's decided to give me 2 spikes. So I am very grateful for Phal Sogo Lawrence. I definitely recommend this plant if you can find it. Many of my orchids that you'll see, most of them that I have tags for, did survive my move from DC. And oh man, what else can I say? Again, 2 spikes there. Hopefully we'll have some blooms to post in the next video. So the next ones to get into are these 2 no ID phals. This one I did purchase sometime in the beginning of the year. I believe my partner purchased this. I really think that the blooms just bloom completely different this time around because I don't have any of these of what looks like this bloom in my collection, which is very interesting about orchids. They can bloom completely different from parent to parent depending on what's in the parentage. So again, the flowers are definitely different from the original, and it's a grocery store no ID from Smith's that I purchased sometime. And I did say the beginning of this year, I meant the beginning of last year in 2023. This one was purchased maybe about 2 weeks ago from Smith's, and this one is a clearance foul. I think she was only like $2.50. I highly recommend waiting for certain orchids to go on clearance in the store. They're just great. And again, she's been in bloom since the purchase. She was originally on my orchid wall, but I moved her to the grow space. Once I saw that the plant wasn't doing anything, I thought maybe giving it a little light now that my temperature is increasing would spark it to either grow some foliage or, I don't know, put out some more flowers at the end of the spike, but we will see. So here is the next plant to talk about. I actually purchased this Paphiopedilum called Pap Psych back in, let's see, August of 2020 from a Etsy dealer or Etsy vendor named Plant Addict. Yeah, I believe the name was Plant Addict. And let me tell you, this is one of the cutest paths. Has tiny, tiny white blooms. It is a primary hybrid, which means that it only has two species in the background, Boloculum and Nivium. So I call this Paphiopedilum Bella all the time. It does have a second growth, but I don't know where I put it. I think it might be in the other grow space on the other side of my living room. But yeah, I've had this plant for almost 4 years. This August will be 4 years that I had it in my collection, and this is the third blooming, but this is the first blooming with two flowers. So it looks like it's going to give me two flowers, and I'm very excited about that. And I would say that this is a plant only because it did bloom in the summer one time. I think this is a plant that will just bloom when the conditions are right. So I have some slow release fertilizer. The light is good because I have these lights from Orchid Hobbyist, but I purchased them a long time ago when he was just Jeff lights. And my temperatures are good. The temperatures here are pretty good, being that I live in the desert, but they're in the window, so they do experience a pretty good temperature drop no matter the season. And I do have two more plants that are in spike. Let's see. So this is my Pinglong Cherish. I got this back in March of 2022. I don't remember from where. I know it's in my Instagram though. And the funny thing about this orchid is that it was in the corner down here and I didn't see the spike until yesterday. So I don't even know if the blooms are going to last. I did discover the spike during the watering yesterday in the morning time. But I will say that it was a very, very fragrant orchid. It was extremely like rosy, almost like the Avon products my grandmother used to buy. And I don't know, it just had a very nostalgic smell of my grandmother, like rosy Avon lotions and bath bombs. And then let's see what other plant. So here we have a no ID. I did purchase this in bloom, but the flowers faded pretty quickly and that was all that was left. I actually cut that spike maybe 2 or 3 days ago, and check out the foliage. So we definitely know that there's either some Schilleriana or possibly Stewartiana given the size of the flowers, but I would say Schilleriana since the flowers are pink. Yeah, Schilleriana is a pretty cool hybrid that gives us these mottled leaves like this one here. This no ID also has the same modeling, and one of my favorite things about orchids in general. And with that, I will leave you guys for the next video. Thank you so much for staying tuned. And I hope you learned something because I really enjoy sharing the tips and tricks now that I'm almost 4 years into this hobby. And although I struggle in the desert, my successes are definitely worth noting. So I will catch you all in the next video. Happy growing.